as our armies penetrated the country, either to Texas or to the interior of Georgia or Alabama. Thus, the considerable portion of the laboring force had been withdrawn from its former employments, but a majority of the slaves remained on the plantations to which they belonged, especially in those parts of the country which were not touched by the war, and where, consequently, the Emancipation Proclamation was not enforced by the military power, although not ignorant of the stake they had in the result of the contest. The patient bondmen waited quietly for the development of things. Oh my gosh, this is long, small ones. But as soon as the struggle was finally decided and our forces were scattered about detachments to occupy the country, the so far unmoved masses began to stir. The report went among them that their liberation was no longer a mere contingency, but a fixed fact. Large number of people of color left the plantations. Many flocked to our military posts and camps to obtain a certainty of their freedom, and others walked away merely for the purpose of leaving the places on which they had been held in slavery. And because they could now go with impunity, still others, and their numbers was by no means considerable, remained with their former masters and continued their work on the field, but under new and as yet unsettled conditions, and under the agitating influence of the feeling of restlessness. In some localities, however, where our troops had not yet penetrated and where no military posts was within reach, planters endeavored and partially succeeded in maintaining between themselves and black people the relations of master and slave, partly by concealing from them the great changes that had taken place, and partly by terrorizing them into submission to their behest. But aside from these expectations, the country found itself thrown into that confusion, which is naturally inseparable from the change so great and so sudden. The white people were afraid of black people, and black people did not trust the white people. The military power of the national government stood there, and was looked up to as the protector of both. Some of the planters with whom I had occasions to converse expressed their determination to adopt the course which best accord with the spirit of free labor, to make black people work by offering him fair inducements, to stimulate his ambition, and to extend to him those means of intellectual and moral improvements which are best calculated to make him an intelligent, reliable, and sufficient free laborer, and a good and useful citizen. I regret to say that views and intentions are so reasonable I found confined to my small minority, aside from the assumptions that black people will not work without physical compulsion. There appears to be another popular notion prevalent in the South, which stands as no less serious an obstacle in the way of successful solutions of the problem. It is that black people exist for the special object of raising cotton, rice, and sugar for the whites, and that it is illegitimate for him to indulge, like other people, in the pursuit of his own happiness in his own way. I made it a special point in most of the conversations I had with Southern men to acquire into their view with regards to this subject. I found indeed some gentlemen of thought and liberal ideas who readily acknowledged the necessity of providing for the education of people of color, and whom declared themselves willing to cooperate to that end to the extent of their influence. Some planters thought of establishing schools in their estates, and others would have been glad to see measures taken to that effect by the people of the neighborhoods in which they lived. But whenever I asked the question whether it might be be hoped that the legislators of their states or their county authorities would make provisions for black education. I never received an affirmative, and only in 2 or 3 instances feebly encouraging answers. At least I was forced to the conclusion that, aside from a small number of honorable exceptions, the popular prejudice is almost as bitterly set aside. Black people's having the advantage of education is as it was when black people was a slave, when a black person was a slave. There there may be an hold on. There may be an improvement in that respect, but it would prove only how universal and prejudice was in the former days. Hundreds of times I heard the old assertion repeated that, quote, learning will spoil the inwards for work, end quote, and that black people education, black education will be ruined, will be the ruin of the South, end quote. Another most singular notion still holds a potent sway over the minds of the masses. It is the elevation of black people will be the degradation of the whites. The emancipation of slaves is submitted to only insofar as chattel slavery in the old form could not be kept up. But although the free man is no longer considered the property of the individual master, he is considered the slave of society, and all independent state legislations will share the tendency to make him such. The ordinance abolishing slavery, passed by the convention under the pressure of circumstances, will not be looked upon as barring the establishment of a new form of servitude. Carl summed up the matter. Here's his sum up. Whenever I go, the street, the shops, the house, the hotel, or the steamboats, I hear the people talk in such a way as to indicate that they are unable to conceive of black people as possessing any rights at all. Men who are honorable in their dealings with their white neighbors will cheat black people without feeling a single twinge of their honor. To kill a black person, they do not deem murder. A black woman, they did not think fornication to take the property away from black people. They do not consider robbery. The people boast that when they get freemen's affair in their own hands, to use their own expression, quote, the inwards will catch hell, end quote. The reason of all this is simply manifest. The whites esteem black people their property by natural rights, right? And however much they admit that the individual relations of master and slaves have been destroyed by the war and by the president's Emancipation Proclamation, they still have an ingrained feeling that black people at large belong to the whites at large. Corroboration of the main points of the thesis of Carl came from many sources from Virginia. Before the abolition of slavery and before the war, it was the policy of slaveholders to make a free black person as despicable a creature and as uncomfortable as possible. They did not want free black people about at all. They considered it an injury to the slave, as it undoubtedly was, creating discontent among the slaves. The consequence were that there was always an intense prejudice against the free black person. Now, very suddenly, all have become free black people, and that was not calculated to ally that prejudice. And then now we got another assert. The men of color testified. There was a distinct tendency towards compulsion, towards reestablished slavery under another name. Black people coming into Yorktown from regions of Virginia and thereabout said that they had worked all year and received no pay and were driven off the 1st of January. The owners sold their crops and told them they had no further use for them and that they might go to the Yankees, or the slaveholders offers to take them back but refused to pay any wages. A few others offered $1 a month and clothing and food. They were not willing to pay anything for work. The courts aided the subjection of black people. George S. Smith of Virginia, resident since 1848, said that he had been in the Provost Marshal's department and, here's what he said, have had great opportunities of seeing the case that are brought before him. Although I am prejudiced against black people myself, still I must tell the truth and must acknowledge that he has rights. In more than 9 cases out of 10 that have come up in General Patrick's office, black people has been right and the white man has been wrong. And I think that will be found in to be the case if you examine the different provost marshals. All right. It was common for Virginians in 1865 to 1866 to advocate wholesale expulsion of black people. This attitude arose from the slave trade. And here we go again. We're back to another slave system of Virginia has been such as to exhaust very large of able-bodied laborers. I have been informed that 20,000 of that class were annually sold from Virginia. Consequently, a very large portion of people of color population were so composed of the aged, infirm women and children, and the beginning freed from the necessity of supporting them is really a great relief in the present poverty of the people, a relief to their former owners. And again, of course, those who wanted black labor immediately and were pushed on by the current high price of products were willing to comprise in some respect. And here's what they said. So many different excerpts. The more intelligent people were those who had landed estates, needed their labor, being dependent upon them for labor. They see the necessity of employing them and are disposed to get along with them. All of the people, however, are extremely reluctant to grant black people his civil rights. Those privileges that pertain to freedom, the protection of life, liberty, and the property before the laws, the right to testify in the courts, etc. They are all very reluctant to concede that. And if it is ever done, it will be because they were forced to do it. They are reluctant even to consider and treat black people as a free man. Lieutenant Sanders, who was in North Carolina for 3 years, said that as soon as Southerners came in full control, they intend to put in force laws. And here's what he said. Jesus, this is nothing but excerpts. Hold on a second. Yeah, Lieutenant Sanders. Okay. I am not allowing a contraband to stay in any section over such a length of time without work if he does not seize him and sell him. In fact, that is done now in the country of Gates, North Carolina. The county police, organized under orders from headquarters, did enforce that. Mr. Parker told me that he had hired his people for a season. That directly after the surrender of General Lee, he called them up and told them they were free, that he was better used to them than to others, and would prefer hiring them, that he would give them board and 2 suits of clothing to stay with him till the 1st day of January, 1866, and on Sunday suit at the end of that time, that they consented willingly, in fact preferred to remain with him, etc. But from his people I learned that though he did call them up as stated, yet when one of them demurred At the office, his son James flew at him and cuffed him and kicked him. That after that, they were all perfectly willing to stay. They were watched night and day. That Bob, one of the men, had been kept chained nights. That they were actually afraid to try to get away. Hold on a second, everybody. It's just nothing but like excerpts after excerpts after excerpts. Jesus. That's all it is. Sometimes in the resentment of the new state affairs was funny. The county judge near Goldsboro, who had never been addressed by black people unbidden, came to the quarters of Lieutenant Sanderson. And here's what he said. Lieutenant, what am I to stand for? Okay, Lieutenant, what am I to stand from these free people? I suppose you call them free. What insult am I obliged to suffer? I am in a perfect fever. I told him I saw he was and asked him what he complained of. If there was anything wrong, I would right it. Well, said he, one of these infernal N-words came along as I sat on my pizza in the morning and bowed to him and said, "Good morning." One of our soldiers from Alabama, it was reported, the planters hated black people, and the latter class distrust the former. And while this state of things continues, there cannot be harmonious action in developing the resources of the country. Besides, a good many men are unwilling yet to believe that the peculiar institutions of the South has been actually abolished, and still have the lingering hope that slavery will not in name, will yet in some form practically exist. And hence the great anxiety to get back into the Union, which being accomplished, they will then, as I have heard it expressed, fix the black people. They use the N-word, of course. It is the simple fact capable of definite proof that the black man does not receive the faintest shadow of justice. I aver that in 9 cases out of 10 within my own observation, where a white man was provoked and affray with a black and S-word misused him, the black man has been fined for insolent language because he did not receive the chastisement in submissive silence, while the white man has gone free. The New York Herald says of Georgia, Jesus. Springing naturally out of this disorder state of affairs is the organization of regulators, so-called. Their numbers include many ex-Confederate cavalries of the country, and their mission is to visit summary justice upon any offenders against the public peace. It is needless to say that their intentions, as largely directed to maintain quite a submission among black people, the shooting or stringing up of some, obstreperous N-words by the regulators. It is so common an occurrence as to excite little remarks, nor is the work of proscription confined to the freemen alone. The regulators go to the bottom of the matter and strive to make it uncomfortably warm for any new settler with demoralizing innovations of wages for N-words. The Committee of the Florida Legislators reported in 1865 that it was true that one of the results of the war was the abolition of African slavery, but it will hardly be seriously argued that the simple act of emancipation of itself worked any change in the social, legal, and political status of such of the African race as were already free, nor will it be insisted to presume that the emancipated slave technically dominated a free man occupied in any higher positions in a scale of rights and privileges than did the free black person. If these authorities, if these interferences be corrected, then its results as a logical conclusion that all the arguments going to sustain the authority of the General Assembly to discriminate in the case of free black people equally apply to that of free men or emancipated slaves. But it is insisted by the certain class of radical theorists that the act of emancipation did not stop in its effect in merely severing the relations of master and slave, but that it extended further and so operated as to exalt the entire race and place them upon terms of perfect equality with the white man. These fantastic may be very sincere and honest in their conviction, but the result of the recent elections in Connecticut and Wisconsin should very conclusively that such is not the sentiment of the majority of the so-called free states. Some Southerners saw the emancipation nothing but extermination for the black race. The provisional government of Florida became almost tearful over the impending fate of black people and the guilt of the North. And here we go, another expert. This unfortunate class of our population, but recently constituting the happiness and best provided for laboring population in the world, by no act of theirs or voluntary congruence of ours, with our prior training and prepared them for their new responsibilities, have been suddenly deprived of the fostering care and protection of their old masters, and are now to become, like so many children, gambolling upon the brink of the yawning precipice. I said it. I said it. Got to give me a chance to try to sound it out. Careless of the future and intent only on reveling in the present unrestrained employment of the newly found babbled of freedom. Judge Humphrey of Alabama said, I'm getting tired of these experts. I want to move on to the I believe in the case in return to the Union, we would receive political cooperation so as to secure the management of the labor by those who were slaves. There is really no difference, in my opinion, whether we hold them as absolute slaves or obtain their labor by some other method. Of course, we prefer the old method, but the question is not now before us. The 12-year residents of Alabama said, I'm getting tired of this. Why not move? Sorry, everybody. There is a kind of innate feeling, a lingering hope among many of the South, in the South, that slavery will be re-galvanized in some shape or other. They tried by their laws to make a worse slavery than there was before. For the freeman was not now the protection which the master from interest gave him before. Every day the press of the South testified to the outrages that are being perpetrated upon unoffending people of color by the state militia. These outrages are particularly flagrant in the states of Alabama and Mississippi, and are of such character as to demand most imperatively the interposition of the national executive. These men are rapidly inaugurating of conditions of things a feeling among the freemen that will, if not checked, ultimate in insurrection. The freemen are peacefully and inoffensive. Yet, if the whites continue to make in all their lives are worth to go through the country as free people have the right to do, they will goad them to the point at which submission and patience cease to be a virtue. I call our attention to this matter after reading and hearing from the most authentic sources, officers and others, or weeks of continuous and of the militia robbing people of color of their property, arms, shooting them in the public highways, if they refuse to halt when commanded, the lodging them in jails, and found from home without passes, and ask as a matter of a simple justice to an unoffending and downtrodden people that you use our influence to induce the president to issue an order of or proclamation forbidding the organization of state militia in Mississippi. Why are we doing all these? I get the point. I get the point. I really do. I really get the point now. I respect earnestness. I must say that if at end of all the blood that has been shed and the treasure expended, the unfortunate black person is to be left in the hands of his infiltrated and disappointed former owners and legislate a fix his status. God help him, for his cup of bitterness will overflow indeed. Was ever such a policy conceived in the brain of men before? I'm getting these guys are all fucking bastards and racist, and they just, yeah. Sumner quotes an authority of peculiar value, a gentleman writing from Mississippi. Here's the person writing from Mississippi. I regret to state that under the civil power deems by all the inhabitants of Mississippi to be paramount, the conditions of the free men in many portions of the country has become deplorable and painful in the extreme. I must give it as my deliberate opinion that the free men are today in the vicinity where I am writing worse off in most respect than when they were held slaves. If matters are permitted to continue on as they now seem likely to be, it needs no prophet, no predict a rising on the part of people of color populations and the trembling scene of bloodshed and desolation. Nor can anyone blame black people if this proves to be the result. I have heard since my arrival here of numberless atrocities that have been perpetrated upon the freemen. It is sufficient to state that the old overseers are in power again. The object of the Southerners appear to be to make good their often repeated assertions to the effect that black people would die if they were freed. To make it so, they seem determined to goad them to desperation in order to have and execute, to turn upon and annihilate them. General Fisk, early in 1966, said, I have today received a statement of two very respectable men of color who went into northern Mississippi from Nashville, the rented plantation. Both of them were men of means, and one a reputed son of Ishmael G. Harrison, a former governor of Tennessee. Both were intelligent men of color. They have been driven out and warned not to put their feet within the state again. Their written statements and affidavits I have and will cheerfully place them in the hands of the committee if they desire it. They are reliable men. I know them both. A former Mississippi slaveholder wrote. This is all the writings. Hold on a second. I want to see something. Remember 180? 180. Hold on a second. I want to see how long these are just letters and notes. Hold on. I just want to see. God. This whole chapter. Is this whole chapter just this way? Jesus. Looks like we're just reading notes and letters and stuff like that, everybody. The former Mississippi slaveholder wrote, as a man who has been deprived of large numbers of persons he once claimed as slaves. I protest against such a course. If it is intended to follow up the abolition of slavery by a liberal and enlightened policy, by which I mean bestowing upon them the full rights of other citizens, then I can give this movement my heart and hand. But if the black person is to be left in a helpless condition, far more miserable than that of slavery, I would ask what was the object of taking him from those who claimed his services. General Chetland tells us that while he was in command for 2 months of Jackson District, containing nine counties, there was an average of 1 black man killed every day, and that in moving out 40 miles on the expedition, he found 7 black people wantonly butchered. Colonel Thompson, assistant commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau of the state, tells us that there is now a daily average of 2 to 3 black men killed in Mississippi. The sable patriots in blue, as they return, are the objects of special spite. Governor Sharkey of Mississippi said, "My expectations concerning them is that they are destined to extinction beyond all doubt. We must judge the future by the past. I could tell you a great many circumstances to that effect. I am sorry I did not come prepared with means to state the percentage of death among them. It is alarming, appalling. I think they will gradually die out." I'm tired of reading all these racist fucks. They're all fucking racist fucks, by the way. I'm doing nonstop reading from excerpts of racist fucks towards black people. It's fucking, I'm getting kind of annoyed at it. General Fisk receives a letter from the rich planters living in DeSoto County, Mississippi. He had on his plantation a little girl and wrote me a long letter in relations to it, which closed up by saying, quote, as to recognizing the rights of free men and to their children, I will say there is not one man or woman in all the South who believes they are free, but we consider them as stolen property, stolen by the bayonets and the damnable United States government. Are yours truly, T. Yancey. There is one thing that must be taken into account, and that is there will exist a very strong disposition among the masters to control these people and keep them as a subordinate and subjected class. Undoubtedly, they intend to do that. I think the tendency is to establish a system of serfdom is the great danger to be guarded against. I talked with the planter of the La Forchi district near, oh my gosh, Tabudaville. He said he was not in favor of secession. He avowed his hopes and expectations that slavery would be restored there in some form. I said, quote, if we went away and left these people now, do you suppose you could reduce them to slavery? End quote. He laughed and scorned the idea that they could not. What? Said I. These men who have had arms in their hands. Yes, he said. We should take the arms away from them, of course. End quote. There was no inconsiderable number of Southerners who astutely maintained that black people were not free. The Planters Party of Louisiana in 1864 proposed to revive the Constitution in 1852 with all its slavery features. They believed that Lincoln had emancipated the slaves in the rebellious part of the country. As a war measure, slavery remains intact within the federal lines, except as to the return of fugitives, and might be reinstated everywhere at the close of hostilities, or in any case, compensation might be obtained by loyal citizens through the decisions of the Supreme Court. The situation in Texas, as peculiar, during the war Texan produced had been sent to Europe by the way of Mexico, and a steady stream of cash came in, which made slavery all the more valuable. At the end of the war, slavery was essentially unimpaired. When the federal soldiers approached, some of the planters set their black people free, and some black people ran away. But most black people were kept on plantations to await federal action. And there was widespread belief that slavery was an institution and would continue to some form. The Houston Texans Telegraph was of the opinion that emancipation was certain to take place, but that compulsory labor would replace slavery. Since black people was to be freed by the federal government solely with the view to the safety of the Union, his conditions would be modified only so far as to ensure this, but not so far as materially to weaken the agricultural resources of the county. Therefore, black people would be compelled to work under police regulations and a stringent character. Mr. Sumner reported in 1866 a special slave trade from the South to the Caribbeans and South America. Another big trade, this is what he says, another big trade is going on, that of running black people to Cuba and Brazil. They are running through the country dressed as Yankee clothes, hiring men, giving them any price they ask to make terpene on the bay, sometimes on the rivers, sometimes to make sugar. They get them on the cars. Of course, black people don't know where he is going. They get him to the bay and tell him to go on the steamer to go around the coast. And away goes poor Coffee to slavery again. They are just cleaning out this section of the country of the likeness, men and women in it. Federal officers are mixed up in it too. And that's the end of that one. So until we get to the next one. Hello. So such for the attitude of the owning slaves, of the owning class, the former slave owners. But the great mass of the Southerners were not slaveholders. They were white peasant farmers, artisans, with a few merchants and professional men. Large numbers of these were fed by the federal government and formed a considerable portion of the fugitives after the war. General Hatch reports in 1866, quote, "The poorest class of white people have an intense dislike towards black people in Mississippi. 56 of the soldiers of the Confederate Army were not slave owners and had fought against the competition of black people and for their continued slavery." And here's what they say. The most discouraging feature was the utter helplessness of the white community in the face of terrible problems. Almost any thoughtful traveler could see that the majority of whites were parasites, idlers, and vagabonds. According to Sidney Andrews, quote, "The black people, as bad as his condition is," said he, quote, "seems to me on the whole to accommodate himself more easily than the whites in the changed situation. It should say that the question at issue in the South is not, quote, what shall be done with black people, but what shall be done with the whites. The black people manage to live comfortably for the most part and help each other, but the whites, accustomed to having all their affairs managed by the aristocracy, which was then ruined, seemed powerless. They closed committees and reported cases of suffering, but any organized action on a large scale could not be expected. It was hoped that aid for the whites would come from the North, for fearful distress, for hunger was inevitable. General Turner said of these conditions in Virginia, here's what he said: "Among the lower classes of the whites, where there is a spirit of aggression towards black people, and a great many of black people are inclined to take the thing in in their own hands. They are not disposed to be imposed upon by those people. If they can have half a show to defend themselves. With the lower classes, I speak now more particularly of the city of Richmond. Probably the feelings does not exist to such an extent in the rural districts. There is an impulsive feeling of aggression, a desire to get black people out of the way. They do not think of his rights. They do not appear to know what it means. Only they feel that black people has something. General Fisk spoke in Tennessee. It is a melancholy fact that among the bitterest opponents of black people in Tennessee are the intensely radical royalists of the Mountain District, the men who have been in our armies. Quote, the poorest classes of white people have an intense dislike towards them, said General Hatch. He especially emphasized the situation in Tennessee and spoke of the aid that was being given the white fugitives. He said that black people knew that without legal rights, he was not safe from the poor whites, and that they had not issued to black people 1/10 of the rations that they had given the poor whites. The hatred towards black people as a free men is intense among the low and brutal, who are the vast majority. Murderers, shooting, whippings, robbings, brutal treatment of every kind are daily inflicted upon them. And I am sorry to say, in most cases, they can get no redress. They don't know where to complain or how to speak justice after they have been abused and cheated. The habitual differences towards the white man makes them fearful of his anger and revenge. The Union members of Tennessee legislators said that long before the war, common laborers had learned to curse the Yankees and the abolitionists and to talk about black equality and its rights in the territories. With all this went a great degree of personal violence, leaving out the moment of group violence and organized life against black people, which was continuous. The personal physical opposition was continually in existence. The candidate of Congress of Virginia in 1865 said, I oppose to the southern states being taxed at all for the redemption of this national debt, either directly or indirectly. I will vote to repeal all laws that have heretofore been passed for what purpose. And in doing so, I do not consider that I violate any obligation to which the South was a party. We have never plighted our faith for the redemption of the war debt. The people will be borne down with taxes for years to come, even if the war debt is repudiated. It will be the duty of the government to support and maintain and disable soldiers, and this will be a great expense. And if the United States government requires the South to be taxed for the support of Union soldiers, we should insist that all disabled soldiers should be maintained by the United States government without regard to the side they have taken in the war. The national debt doubtless seems to you beyond the reach of any hand. Yet I regret it as very probable that one or two or all of three things will be attempted within 3 years after the Southern members of Congress are admitted to seats. The repudiation of the national debt, the assumption of the Confederate debt, or the payment of several $100 million to the South for property destroyed and slaves emancipated. The leaders of the South Carolina, James H. Campbell, said, I believe that when our votes are admitted into that Congress, if we are tolerable, wise, governed by a moderate share of common sense, we will have our own way. I am speaking not to be reported. We will have our own way yet if we are true to ourselves. We know the past. We know what no, we know not what is to be our future. We are not in the condition to accept what we cannot help. We are not in the condition where it is a part of wisdom to wait or and give what we cannot avoid giving. I believe as surely as we are a people, so surely we are guided by wisdom. We will, by the beginning of the next presidential election, which is all that is known of the Constitution. For when we talk of the Constitution of the United States, we mean the presidential election and the share of the spoils. I believe then we may hold the balance of power. I'm tired of reading these racist fucks. I'm really tired of it. Thus, gradually, the South conceived a picture. It deliberately looked backward towards slavery in the days when two Southern poor whites were President of the United States. Although he was emancipator, Abraham Lincoln, too, in many respects, was looking backward towards the past. Lincoln's solution for the black problem was colonization. It was in this respect, he went back to the early 19th centuries when the American Colonization Society was formed with what proved to be agnostic objects and antagonistic objects. The first was the philanthropic object of removing the black person to Africa and starting him on a road of independent culture in his own fatherland. The second and more affluential object was to get rid of free black people in the United States so as to make a color caste, which is okay to say, in the permanent foundation of American black slavery. The contradictions of these two objects was a real cause of the failure of colonization, since it earlier incurred the bitter opposition of both abolitionists and black leaders. The result of the movement was the establishment of Liberia in an unhospitable land and without adequate capital and leadership. The survival of that little country of our day is one of the miracles of black effort, despite all of the propaganda and criticisms that have been leveled against that country. When black people when the black question became prominent before the war, the project of colonization was revived, and Abraham Lincoln believed in it, quote, as one means of solving the great race problem involved in the existence of slavery in the United States. Without being an enthusiast, Lincoln was a firm believer of colonization. The Lincoln-Douglas debate, Lincoln said in Peoria, Illinois. Are you okay, Joe? You with me still? Okay. Doing pretty good, I guess, huh? Yeah. Yeah. If all earthly power were given me, I should now, I should not know what to do as to the existing institutions. My first impulse would be to free all the slaves and send them to Liberia, to their own native land. But a moment's reflection would convince me that whatever whatever of high hopes as I think there may be in the long run, its sudden execution is impossible. If they were all landed there in a day, they would all perish in the next 10 days. And there are not surplus shipping and surplus money enough in the world to carry them there in many times 10 days. And carry them there in many times 10 days. What then? Free them all and keep them among us as underlings? It is quite certain that this betters their condition. I think that I would not hold one in slavery at any rate. Yet the point is not clear enough for me to denounce people upon. What's next? What next? Free them and make them politically and socially our equals? My own feelings will not admit of this. And if mine would, we well know that those of the great mass of whites will not. Later, speaking at Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln declared, quote, that the separation of races is the only perfect preventive of amalgamation. Several prominent Republicans espoused deportation in 1859. F.B. Blair of Missouri wrote to the Senator Doolittle of Minnesota, I am delighted that you are pressing the colonization scheme in your campaign speeches. I touch upon it 3 or 4 times in my addresses in Minnesota. And if I am any judge of effect, it is the finest theme with which to get at the hearts of the people, and it can be defended with success at all points. I made it the culminating point, an inevitable result of Republican doctrine. They're just racist fucks. These are all just racist fucks just talking about the fucking black people and their destinies without even talking to fucking black people alone. Like, they're still fucking racist fucks. All I'm doing is reading the fortification of racist people. That's all I'm doing. That's all it is. They're all fucking racist. When the general strike of the slaves began during the war, and black fugitives began to pour into the federal lines, Lincoln again brought forward his proposal of colonization, not simply for the freemen, but for such free black people as should wish to immigrate. He suggests an appropriation of acquiring suitable territory and for other expenses. By the act of April 16th, 1862, which abolished slavery in the districts of Columbia, Congress made an appropriation of $100,000 for voluntary black immigrants at the expense of $100 each. And later, July 16th, an additional appropriation of $500,000 were made at Lincoln's request. The president was authorized, quote, to make provisions for transportation, colonization, and settlement in some tropical country beyond the limits of the United States, and such persons of the African race made free by the provisions of this act, as many as may be willing to immigrant, having first obtained the consent of the government of said country to their protection and settlement within the same, with all the rights and privileges of free men. By an act of July 17th, 1862, the president was authorized to colonize black people made free by the confiscation acts. Proceeding from the obfuscated property were to replace monies appropriated for colonization. Charles Sumner vigorously attacked these plans. He said colonization was unwise because besides its intrinsic and fatal justice, you will deprive the country of what it most needs, which is labor. Figures. Those freedmen on the spot are better than mineral wealth, which is a mine out of which riches can be drawn, provide you let him share the product, and through him that general industry will establish, which is better than anything by virtue, and is indeed a form of virtue. They just want them to be back to being fucking, just go back to work. Just be our underpaid workers. In several cases, I gotta get ready. Let me get to this. In several cases, President Lincoln interviewed delegations on the subject. He believed that the good colonization scheme would greatly encourage volunteer emancipations on the border states. He spoke to the border states representatives and said that room in South America for black people, colonization would be obtained cheaply. He received in August 1862 a committee of people of color, men, headed by E.M. Thompson, and urged colonization on account of the different race. Should the people of our race be colonized? And where? Why should they leave this country? You and we are different races. We have different we have between us a border, a broader differences that exist between almost any other two races. Rather it is right or wrong, I need not discuss, but this physical difference is a great disadvantage to us both. As I think our race suffers very greatly, many of them, many of them by living among us, while others suffer from their presence. In a word, we suffer on each side. If this is omitted, its efforts is a reason why we should be separated. If we deal with those who are not free at the beginning and whose intellect are clouded by slavery, we have very poor material to start with. If intelligent men of color, such as are before me, would move in this manner, much might be accomplished. A bill, a bill introduced into the House in 1862, appropriating $200 million, 20,000 to colonize, and the rest to purchase 600,000 slaves of Unionist owners in border states. The bill was not passed, but the committee made an elaborate report on colonization July 16th, 1862, declaring the most formidable difficulties which lies in the way of emancipation in most, if not in all the slave states, is the belief which obtains especially among those who own no slaves, that if black people shall become free, they must still continue in our midst, and in some measures be made equal to the Anglo-Saxon race. The belief in the interior of the black race, it indelibly fixed upon the public mind. The differences of the race separate them as well as with a wall of fire. There is no instance in history where liberated slaves have lived in harmony with their former masters. When denied equal rights, but the Anglo-Saxons will never give his consent to black equality, and the recollection of the former relations of master and slave will be perpetuated by the challengeless color of the Ethiopian's skin. Emancipation, therefore, without colonization could offer little to the black race. A revolution of black people might result, but only to their undoing. To appreciate and understand this difficulty, it is only necessary for one to observe that in proportion as the legal barrier established by slavery have been removed by emancipation, the prejudice of caste becomes stronger and public opinion more tolerant to the black race. Okay, could you 186? Remember 186. 186. Jesus. It's a long chapter. I don't think there's a stopping point. 186. 186. Uh-huh. 186. 186. 186. 186. Yep. Nothing. 186. 186. 186. 186. 186. 186. All right. What happened? What do you mean? Oh well. All right. We'll read for a little bit longer and then we'll stop. In this second annual, oh wait, in this second annual message, December. You know what? I might just stop here. No, it's not that. It seems like a good stopping point. Fucking yeah, they're all racist pieces of shit. Not one time do they bring the discussion in with black people and actually have a huge discussion of what black people wanted to do. They freed the slaves only because, again, because they were forced to. Because black people were like, "Fuck this, we're done. I'm out." And they utilize them as cannon fire, free labor, and everything. And now they're just unaliving like hell in the South, and like just being lynched in the streets and unalived all the time. And then now they're saying, well, let's force them into being colonizers. And it's just like, bro, fucking ask what they want. What do black people want? You know what I mean? Not what you want. It's just annoying. And a lot of these people are like, well, I don't know if we can stand being next to them because we might piss off the white people. The poor whites might not be able to be exploited as much, and we might have to give them power. We don't want to do that. We want the slavery to continue again and be reformed. We were hoping for that. It's just fucking wild, man. These fucking white people are just so fragile. They require underclasses all the time to fit their needs. I'm about to say that, like, yeah, like there's not many white proletariats out here, honestly. They've all been regulated. The proletariat's been regulated to non-white positions. To be honest with you, I fear because of the racial caste system. I don't know. But anyways, any questions? Anything you want to talk about before I close it out? It's all right. There's more to still to read. It's just I like it, but it's just like I get the point. They all just wanted the reinvention of the slavery. And maybe they might get, I think in a sense, if we look at it now, we can see that through the Constitution. I wonder if you're going to bring up the 13th Amendment and like how black people got put back into slavery with incarceration. So I wonder if that's going to come up. We'll find out. We'll find out. We'll find out. But yeah, like no hope. They didn't care. They just their hands were forced. The condition arised, and they had no idea how to take it on. They had no investigation, no scientific inquiry, no material analysis of what's going on how to do these things. They just were like, no, like black people. If we set them free, they're just gonna be like, they're just gonna unalive each other, and they're gonna go into like barbarism, and that's not even the case. Not at all. Yeah. Yeah, the white people were forcing it because white people were so goddamn fragile. They're like, oh my god, this black person is now my equal. Fuck that. It's like, bro, race doesn't even exist, man. It doesn't even exist. It's a construct. We have to deal with it now and destroy it. We have to deal with it now and understand it and have an evaluation and come up with ways to destroy it and get rid of it and completely eradicate the concept of whiteness. Because like whiteness does destroy culture, completely. It gives up culture. Race does get rid of your culture identity. The only reason why black and white is an identity marker in a category is because of of the racist system of capitalism, because of colonization, because of that's the whole reason why indigenous is an identity, because of colonization. That's the reason why it's a racial category. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and close it out. I appreciate it. I hope everybody has a good night. Chicken, are you going live later? I know you're in here. I see you. I see you. They might be away from their phone. I'm guessing. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and close it out. I don't think Chicken Strip's close to their phone anyway. So, all right. Thank you. Wait, no, I don't know. Two Spirit isn't feeling well. Okay, so it's